of change, whether in psychotherapy or any context, is, you know, it's really easy to speak from abstractions. You know, it's wrong to do this, it's right to do that, and so the generalization is what's a table and how do we see table. But, you know, to invite people to speak from their stories, from their interaction, their experience, if you will, of something, that's what we want to talk about. And so the same, I mean, it's the same, and, you know, as I think you said, John, but I'm not sure now, you know, it's really hard when people are talking about construction or constructivism and, you know, this is a table. You know, let's talk about the things that matter. You know, oppression, justice.
Yeah, to you, relatively, right? But not maybe to some people, like if in terms of their language, like the negotiation of language, some people aren't, maybe that's not even, it doesn't even exist. Do you know what I'm saying? And I agree with you of sort of introducing it and sort of, you know what I mean, integration, but for some people that's not an issue.
Well,
yeah,
Sheila, in a way what you're saying goes back to what Vincent was saying, what confuses me. And I hear not just social constructionists do this, but people in psychology and many other places do this. So we're talking about, you know, there are these discourses, we need to respect the discourses, engage in this and that, but then we say, well, but we got to talk about what really matters. And talking about this as a table doesn't really matter. Like, okay, well, where's the power to assert that? Or, you know, well, my nephew, now he doesn't want to be taxed. And the assumption is that somehow everyone in this room is going to agree with that. Maybe a couple people think, you know, that, yeah, he shouldn't be taxed, right? Why would we assume, because we all happen to maybe like personal construct psychology, that we're all, you know, ultra-political liberals on this, that, or the other issue? That really becomes fascinating to me, because I see, when it comes to the things that really matters, quote unquote, we often go back to the same kind of stuff. And I hear people who are, you know, it's a little bit like the person I once heard say, on a liberal, open-minded campus like this, there's no room for ideas like that.
So, John, I mean, this is, so now you can launch into your argument about essentializing. Okay.
That'll be next year's conference. Right. Yeah, you've been waiting a while.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you for confirming my construction.
I don't know much about social constructivism. I don't know much about constructivism. I know a lot, but very little, and very little about radical constructivism. And I don't see Maturana as a radical constructivist. He is a biologist.
Right.
Ernst von Glaserfeld was a radical constructivist.
Yeah.
I have so much I want to say, and I'll limit it. For me, it's about cybernetics. And cybernetics is my nest that allows me to include Maturana as a biologist, Herbert Brun as my political communication, anti-communication composer, performer, advocate, Ernst as the radical constructivist, some as performers, Enslin and Segretti, von Forster, Richard's design. So it gives me that nest so that I don't have to negate the other. It's a momentary thing, and this model is useful in this moment, and that model is useful in that moment. And so I'm very excited to be here and to have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about social constructivism. And I have to say, Maturana's definition, I studied with Rebecca Maturana. Maturana's definition of love is the legitimization of the other in coexistence with oneself. And you know, you can choose to try to have power over me and be illegitimate, or you can choose to be in relation with me and maybe have love rather than violence. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Can I just respond to that? So put her on next year's panel, please.
I'm doing a presentation this afternoon what's so radical about radical constructivism.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
In the early days, he talked about biological, just a couple of comments. He talked about biological stickiness. Later on, he talked about the definition of love that you just gave, which is accurate. He also has maintained always that he's not a constructivist, that he's a biologist. He has, of course, by Van Glaserfeld and everybody else, been lumped as a radical. So that's That's why we're...
Yeah, but I think it's very important. And I think it's very dangerous to talk about structural determinism without saying structural determined systems, which makes it a relational dynamic, not an individual dynamic. So I do not see a contradiction of radical constructivism being about individualism. It is a relational theory that in the domain of cognition seduces me.
Yeah. So we're not in disagreement.
Finn, and then Michael, and then David.
Well, we talked about the, why don't we talk about really important things? And it was also mentioned a specific view of authority, which I happen to dislike because it neglected the possibility of manipulation. And that's what we see on the American stage. And we see how many here know about CDS, what that means. If I said credit net swapping, would you then know more about it? The language is full of terms like that, and that has been used to make a few people even richer than they are. We are into a billion-dollar game of single persons. None of them have been punished, but who have been punished, about 14% are out of work in the United States. It may be too low, and 0.1% of the people in the United States own 13% of the whole thing. And then I think when they are so concerned with language, then it should be a very important task to try to translate language in a way so that people are not fooled, because people have been excessively fooled. They have been persuaded to take loans for much more than the worth of their house, and they have tried to talk themselves out of it, and you have these slick salesmen who have been very, very manipulative, and I think that should be a very, very important task to try to protect people and to impress them to sort of stand up on their own and not be so thoroughly cheated. So that I think is important, and especially when you say we live in language, and then you in the language will take your home away from you. What kind of language is that? Why don't you do something about that language?
Well, that's why Maturana specifically mentions hypocrisy.
Mention
Hypocrisy.
yes,
Lying.
yes, exactly.
Yes.
Michael?
I wanted to make 3 points. The first is I don't think that the opposite of relativism is universalism. I like the way Richard Schwader talks about this when he speaks of universality without uniformity. We do have common concerns as humans, but we don't solve those concerns in the same way. That would be my first point. My second point is, Dr. McNamee, I really like what I'm going to call this kind of moral progressivism. A way to get out of moral dilemmas is through coordination and constraint. I think that's our best hope. However, the risk of relativism is anything goes. And it's incoherent, I would argue. And the reason it's incoherent is because when we say we should take a relational stance on humans, or we ought not to pay taxes, or we should pay taxes, we're taking a moral position. And we're saying this is what I think is right, and we're not willing to accept something other unless we be convinced. So we need a third way, it seems to me. That's
Can I just respond to that immediately? Because I'm not saying we should. I'm saying, what if we do? Let's try it. Let's see what happens. It's not. This is not a truth that this is the way we need to be. I'm absolutely not saying that. Okay? Because I agree that would be a complete contradiction. Did you have a third point?
Oh, I think I missed the second and the
Oh,
third.
okay.
All right. And I'm going to, David, we'll come over here, and then I know Bill wants to make a final statement, and if either Sheila or Jay do, you're welcome to. You don't have to.
It sort of fits in with what you just said. You said, what if? What I haven't heard explicitly in the conversation is implicit, is anticipation. And I was invited to read Inquiring Man for a dissertation because my proposal embodied anticipation and validation of those anticipations. You come together at the start of Kelly's work. Change is his assumption, and anticipation is in his fundamental postulate. when you were getting together yesterday in your various hats, how did you anticipate this event and manage to come together? And how did each of your positions enable you to do that? Is anticipation important?
I just ate fish.
Very
We
good.
went out to dinner last night to a seafood place.
I think that's a great question.
It's a great question.
It's a really good question. I think anticipation is very important, but not in a predictive, you know, in a what could possibly happen that you hold lightly so that you can then be in the moment. However, I mean, I think about, you know, the difference between being a brand new university professor and writing out my lecture notes and going in and following it, and being a seasoned one, which is like, okay, this is what I want to do today, but I have no idea how I'm going to do it because I can't know until I'm there with people. And so that's very much the same sort of, for me, that was the anticipation of, let's see where the conversation goes and let's not have prepared, you know, speeches. This is my stance. I mean, actually, my stance is, I'd like to think of it as fluid. So